that kind of leads us into our next, the other recommendation, the one that Heather recommended to me. I can't think of a movie further than Sheen Dillman, but it was, what year did it was 2018, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
2018's Mandy, directed by Panos Cosmatos. I think that's how you say his name. Which, goddamn, what a movie!
Honestly, that might be all you need to say about it.
Yeah, end of show. Yeah, but I watched it last night. I was already familiar with the director's only done 2 movies, this, and then I think in 2010 he did a movie called Beyond the Black Rainbow. Are you familiar with that one?
I haven't watched it, but I'm familiar with it. Yes.
It's I kind of at the time I really liked that one, but in hindsight it's kind of a scenario where it's a lot of style and not a lot of
sustenance.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of, look how impressive these visuals are, and we have a very bare bones story. So while I loved his visual style from that movie, and I was excited to see what he would make next, I was kind of worried that it would be like the same thing of like, it's not a lot of plot and we're really leaning on our visuals here. And he definitely leans a lot on his visuals here, and the plot, I think it's pretty fair to say it is a very like simple plot, but it doesn't, I don't think it leaves anything to be desired. It tells you exactly what it's going to be, and it delivers on exactly what it's going to be in a very satisfying way. And to boot, it's one of the most beautiful movies I can think of. It's amazing. What does that movie mean to you, I guess?
So I mean, a little bit of a kind of a funny backstory is it's one of my best friends, like one of his favorite movies, and he watched it not long after it came out. So I watched it maybe a year and a half ago, around there. First time I watched it, I couldn't talk the whole movie because I remember I had started talking in the beginning, and then it kind of caught me, and the whole time I just kind of sat there with my mouth open at what I was watching. Mm-hmm. You're right, it's a pretty straightforward movie, and when you kind of dumb down and think about the plot, it's very, very simple. Mm-hmm. And it's honestly, if you looked not too hard, been done before. Mm-hmm. But I think that he did a really good twist. Not a twist, but just very different
spin on it.
Yeah, his own style of it. But the movie means to me is just, I mean, like I said, the visuals are absolutely crazy, and I also think that the acting in the movie is great. I mean, I'll be honest, you hear that Nicolas Cage is in a movie and you're like,
that I'm already sold. Yeah. I already want to see it. I don't care what it is.
And like, this was a new kind of character for him to play. Mm-hmm. And he played it like I couldn't think of a better person to play this character. Mm-hmm. I mean, going into it and watching it, it was something different for me at the time, and it's become some of my favorite type of movies to watch now. I'm not even sure what you can really describe that movie as. I mean, when I was talking to my friends about the movie you had recommended me, I had said, I was like, I got recommended a movie that was, a real time of a woman just, living her life, whereas you got recommended LSD revenge story.
Exactly.
And I had said that I wanted to talk about the movie because I think that it deserves more exposure, as well as it's just such an interesting movie, and I had told you I've done an analysis of the movie before to kind of understand why he made some of the decisions he did, because he did write that movie as well. Mm-hmm. Like, he wrote and directed that movie. And it does kind of play into what we were talking about with women in film, which this is women literally in film, as Mandy, not the main character actually, and that's something interesting about it. Mandy ends up kind of being a representation of a very strong character. Mm-hmm. And if you really think about it, she's one of those situations where something that seems so minuscule ends up actually being the root of everything that happens in the movie.
Right. Yeah, the movie doesn't happen without her. And it's kind of like a damsel in distress, but there's no reward of saving the damsel kind of by the end. They quell that stereotype pretty early on. I won't spoil it yet, but it's very it's a revenge story done very simply and very beautifully, and like you said, it is very much about this this woman who is so integral to the main character's life, and just kind of like I think when you boil it down, it's really like two little things that she does that kind of sets the whole thing in motion. She makes eye contact with the crazy Charles Manson
leader,
stand-in, and then ultimately does something that he doesn't like, and then that sets the whole snowball rolling down the hill. But I mean, she's also a very interesting character. Yeah. Even though from the limited time that we do get with her, the small amount of time that you actually interact with her while she's on screen speaks volumes about her character. Pretty early on, when the one time where I would say she speaks the most is when she's telling Nicolas Cage's character Red the story about when she was little and her dad killed all of these baby starlings with a crowbar right in front of her. Mm-hmm. And I mean, her character, I mean, you look at her and she has that big scar and her eye is a little bit, I can't remember if it's a different color or if it's actually like her eye, there's something maybe medically wrong with her eye. I don't remember exactly either. But I mean, she has a very interesting look to her that the scar on her face is never addressed. Mm-hmm. It's just there because, and I think that's an interesting choice that he made to never bring that scar up, because, I mean, they give you the explanation that she may have had a messed up childhood that maybe relates to that scar, but maybe it doesn't. Yeah, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with the both of them, is because you don't really know anything about Nicolas Cage or Mandy, but a lot of their backstory is kind of implied through, like, looking at what's around their house together, or, like you said, seeing that scar on her face. And even the fact that they just live smack in the middle of the woods with almost little to nothing around them. Mm-hmm. And, he brings up potentially wanting to move, and she doesn't want to. She's just a very interesting character for the short amount of time you really kind of get to know her without really knowing anything about her at the same time. Yeah, and it's very interesting, and even though she's the title character, I do feel like, as with almost any movie he's in, Nicolas Cage kind of steals the show. Definitely. He's over the top and crazy like he almost always is, but in a way that fits and doesn't feel out of place. I feel like it's that his sort of intense yelling and screaming and crying delivery really fits well with everything that he's supposed to be experiencing, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of dialogue, which was very impressive. It's a lot of him mugging to the camera. It's a lot of him watching awful things happening, and it's a new level of performance from him. Yeah, he's an amazing actor. That the scene after essentially one of the biggest plot points of the whole movie takes place is when he's in the bathroom with the bottle of vodka and just starts screaming and crying and just like grunting, because he's just it's the only way he can let out his current emotions without just, I mean, he really did just completely break down. Yeah. And that's what I love about that, is that there was no him trying to look like this cool macho man, which goes hand in hand with something with like other parts of the movie, without spoiling that yet. Mm-hmm. That's one of my favorite, because essentially it's also a beautiful scene because of how they designed the house. It's a very interesting house. Yeah. And it's a very, like, the bathroom looks very like 70s. It's whoever did the set design for that room in specific did an amazing job. There's the wallpaper, and there's also
I believe it's Mandy's like nightgown is like hanging on the shelf or something, and he's just standing there in her shirt and his underwear, just screaming and drinking from the bottle.
Right. It's very powerful, and I guess that we can take that as our cue. Where if you haven't seen Mandy, we're about to spoil it, but I definitely recommend it. It's a fun 2 hours to spend, and it's not for everybody if you're not really into horror and I guess gore
Blood,
in some ways.
There's definitely quite a bit of blood in this movie.
Yeah, it's probably not for you.
If you can't watch a Tarantino, you can't watch this.
Perfect way to sum it up. So, yeah, the whole movie is really about his revenge for these cult leaders killing his girlfriend because the cult leader is like, okay, here I am. I am this godly man, and I am presenting myself to you. And she laughs at him, and then everything goes to hell. But that sequence. Almost every single sequence in this movie where someone's tripping or on some type of drug is so visually not just interesting, but it's horrific in its own strange way, where it makes you feel so uncomfortable, like just by its use of color and maybe a little bit of distorted audio. And I think that's one thing that this director does very well, because there was a lot of that in Beyond the Black Rainbow. They're both sort of trippy horror movies, but in very different ways. So I think that this movie definitely highlights his strengths in that area very, very well. And that whole stretch from when they dose her up until when they ultimately kill her in front of Nicolas Cage, I think is one of the most intense sequences I've seen in a movie in a while. It's very, very out there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is when you think about the movie, you think, like, oh, she laughs at them and that's the snowball. For me, when I did the analysis of the movie, something I really noticed is, how big of an impact just her laughing at him is. Essentially, I mean, what happens is this cult leader, I've been trying to figure out his name, I can't remember him.
Jeremiah.
Yeah. But I think a lot of times they end up calling him Sand as well, because it's his last name. So either one, but Jeremiah, they're on like some sort of bus, I guess, going back to their kind of
camp or
like home base for the cult, and he sees her walking. I guess she's walking to work, or she's just taking a walk or something, and they make eye contact. And he demands to his entire cult that he needs her. And they go to Red and Mandy's house. Actually, no, they don't. They kind of make a deal with this biker gang that almost seems paranormal in some way, that's never exactly explained. That they make this kind of deal where this movie is very much so a lot of acid. There's a lot of LSD in this movie. And they make some kind of deal, and the bikers go and they kidnap them, and they, like you said, they dose Mandy with some sort of hallucinogenic, whether it's LSD or not, and they force her into this room with Jeremiah, who's kind of covered in his followers all over him. And he kind of gives her this spiel about how he used to be a musician and he failed, and he was told by someone that he is God, and that everything he sees is his, and he has the right to take it, and that's how he feels about her. And she's very much so tripping. So it's even amazing to me that they have her character make these decisions in the state she's in. And she asks him if the music he's playing is him, and when he proudly says yes, he exposes himself to her. And she laughs at him after he explains that she can kind of be his queen in a sense,
right,
kind of rule with him. And she laughs at him like uncontrollably, and the editing in there is very, it's a very interesting scene, and it's a monumental scene, because this is what we've been talking about, that snowballs the rest of the movie, because essentially he he forces Red to watch as they burn Mandy's body alive in front of everyone. And something I want to bring up that I think will be a little important later is right after she laughs at him, they actually go and see Red, who's tied up on like a wall or a post or something. Mm-hmm. And he says something along the lines of like, "You think you know what love is," or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he forces one of his followers, who he's been having a lot of sex with, and is definitely underage, that he's going to show him what love is, and forces the girl to put a gun to her head and pull the trigger. And in this scenario, there's nothing in it, and she's okay. Mm-hmm. But watching it, watching how crazy Jeremiah is, you really have no idea if there's going to be something in there or not.
Exactly, yeah. It's the vibe that I got was like, this is the ultimate nice guy, bad guy. You know what I mean? Like,
no, that's actually where I kind of was going to go with that, because I did read that when he wrote the character of Jeremiah, he wanted him to be the embodiment of toxic masculinity. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Jeremiah is, and that's kind of why, this is part of why I also wanted you to watch this, because while maybe watching Mandy from the surface view, it doesn't seem like Mandy's laughing at him as much, besides a slap in the face to him, and that's, why he does what he does. As you continue to watch the movie, there's actually a lot of, like, kind of references to him being just the embodiment of toxic masculinity, because, for starters, he's calling this woman's body his own just because he wants to. And another thing is, when you kind of look at the characters of Jeremiah and you look at Nicolas Cage's character Red, it's almost as if Jeremiah wants to be what Red is. Because Red, like we just said, he really shows his emotions in this movie. Mm-hmm. He cries, he screams, but he's also an incredibly angry and vengeful man at the same time. Whereas Jeremiah never really, at the end when Red finally does see Jeremiah for the last few minutes of the film, he pleads with him, and suddenly he's not the big man that he thought he was when he was lighting Mandy on fire, because he was in control then.
Right. It's all about this just power play, and I didn't even think about that until like just now, that it is kind of like it didn't, on surface level, it doesn't really quite go with the theme of like what we've talked about before and the theme with the other movie, but in the same time it's almost like the reverse. It's not so much analyzing women in film and representation, it's analyzing the negative aspects of men in film and how certain characters are portrayed. And it is like I said, the ultimate kind of like, this is the mentality of a lot of people out there, and it's kind of like, you think of it as harmless, but like this is where it can go when it goes to the extreme. Very interesting movie. From the surface level alone, it's a great revenge story, a very great horror movie. Actually, I don't even know that I would necessarily call it a horror movie. I would kind of call it like a very intense action movie, almost. Like it's Kill Bill with a little twinge of horror in there, but
definitely
not quite there. But but beyond that, it has a bunch of very interesting themes that say a lot about what it is to be a man and the negative aspects of when you have a twisted worldview gone too far, or when it's just
especially they try to itemize Mandy. Essentially, they don't. The whole thing to them is that she's just another object that Jeremiah wants, and that's part of why I wanted to bring it up, have you watch it in general, because from the surface, no, it definitely doesn't have any. It seems like it doesn't have anything to do with what we've been talking about tonight, but
it really does.
When it comes down to it, his character was specifically written to be the perfect explanation of toxic masculinity, and he, like, the director had also written it so that essentially so that the director could get revenge on that toxic masculinity, even though it's a movie for them. Because I mean, you're right, it's definitely, thinking about that now, it's definitely like Kill Bill, but a little bit different. It's full of cool weapons and violence and everything, and even the dialogue in the movies, I mean, I think the dialogue is pretty good, because I mean, when he goes to that trailer to get the weapon, his whole little monologue about calling them like weird hippie, like crazy evil, his delivery of it as well, like, makes the movie in itself. But I mean, overall, just I think the movie's beautiful. There's definitely been many times, a lot of times in student films, where, you know, there's kind of that misuse of the reds and the purples, just because you get a little gel happy and you wanna make an experimental movie and you try it. Which is awesome to try that stuff out, but sometimes it just doesn't work for certain themes in certain movies, and this is one of those movies where I couldn't imagine it any other way than the way that it is shot.
Exactly. It uses that color to really, not only just in the trippy drug sequences, but it really uses it's such like heavy saturation to kind of accentuate and really put you in that environment. Like when I like, probably like a weird synesthesia thing, but like when I was watching it and he's like in that scene where he goes to his friend to get the crossbow and you see like it's a hot day in the woods and all that, you like feel the heat in the air and you feel like just that environment. It really it's a weird kind of like, it physically puts you in there. And like the nighttime scenes where he's driving through the woods and all you have is like the red backlights and the orange headlights lighting everything up, it makes you, it creates such a harsh contrast with the shadows that it makes it, even if you didn't have any music or you only saw that driving sequence, it would make you think, oh man, this is scary.
Yeah, I mean, like, plus it's almost the opposite of your recommendation. It is, but in that Nicolas Cage's character is a very down-to-earth man. He's kind of like a woodsman. I think he works in construction. They reveal right in the beginning of the movie.
He's like a logger or something.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And as, you know, when he loses Mandy, he immediately is unhinged by all of the screaming and the vodka and everything. But there is the scene where after he kills a lot of the bikers, he dips his finger into the LSD, or maybe it's not LSD, right. Whatever it is. It's implied that it's LSD. And he just dips his one finger into it and tries it, and there is this whole insane nightmare sequence with like the melting face and everything. And later on, after that, you know, right at the end of the movie, after all is said and done, it's probably become the most iconic thing from the movie, is the scene where he's driving and he looks in his passenger seat and sees Mandy there, and then it cuts back to him with that unhinged grin, completely covered in blood, just an absolutely terrifying, like, you look at this man and you know that something's happened that's made him this way.
And you kind of know from that moment that no matter what happens, it's not really going to be a happy ending. So it's almost sad in that he's gotten his revenge, but it's like it didn't matter.
Anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just, that scene especially, I think of like, from not just the aspect of like, oh man, that's a great use of color to illustrate something unsettling, but it's just the whole movie in general. Like I said, at any given point, their use of color is fantastic, but really ramps up in that second half of going really intense. Like, there's a very clear, it's not just, like you said, it's not just throwing on a gel on a light for the sake of having a gel. It's all very purposeful. Like in that scene when she's talking about the starlings, it's very like blue and green and muted, and it's very peaceful. And then when you have those scenes with like the cultists and when he's forging his weapons and all that, we have like the much harsher reds and the more contrast. And it's like we had mentioned with the lighthouse, it's so purposeful. And it and because of that, it really sticks out in your mind. The music too. It's all you have like very nice sort of like synth melodies of the early 80s in the beginning, but then we kind of get to like droning feedback noise by the end of it to just really like unsettle you and make you uncomfortable.
The soundtrack of that movie is amazing. They have some King Crimson in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't imagine that movie having anything but the songs that it does have. And I mean, you mentioned, you know, kind of like the second part of the movie, and I mean, they do kind of break it up, because I can't remember 100%, but they don't actually bring up the title of the movie until maybe
after the death.
Yeah. I think that's when they kind of break it up into parts. Is after Mandy dies, they bring up just the logo of Mandy, which kind of looks like a metal band logo kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely there's certain movies that you watch and it kind of feels like they're in two parts. Like for me, like Full Metal Jacket, that movie feels like it's in two parts for me.
Yeah, almost two movies.
Yeah, it's like two different movies. Yeah, and that's Mandy feels that way for me, but at the same time doesn't, because I feel like they could have made something alone just out of Mandy's death. That's it.
Right.
But the second part would have flopped without the first part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of I do appreciate the way that they went about kind of wanting to give that background and then kind of making it into a part two, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I get you. Yeah, that it definitely does make sense. But I think that it definitely does feel like two very distinct movies, but I feel like they do flow together well. It's very like you said with Full Metal Jacket, I could easily turn off the movie after the training camp sequence and feel satisfied, or I could start it from that scene with the two of them outside with the prostitute and get just as fulfilling an experience watching either half. But you really can't have, by sheer virtue of the plot, but I think that, like you said, they're very different, but they are a part of a whole in a great way.
For sure.
So I guess, yeah, on that note, that I really liked Mandy. Probably, I think I'm feeling like a 7, maybe an 8 out of 10. I like I said, I'm a big fan of Panos' work, and I want to see what he's going to make next. I wish that he didn't have these big 7-year gaps in between his movies, but whatever he makes next, I'm going to be really excited for, if purely by visual stimuli alone.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I just checked. I gave it a 5-star review on Letterboxd, and that's fair. That's also a biased opinion. That, like I said, I do love the movie. I recommended it.
Right.
I do think it deserves. I would definitely give it a watch. I'd recommend it to anyone like that isn't squeamish, because there's definitely a lot of. It's a very graphic movie for sure.
I would say that it does sometimes. I did feel like that got in the way a little bit for me, and I guess to kind of justify why I'm not like people can think whatever they want, but for me anyway, some of the drawbacks were I do like that it flowed together so well, but I do think the pacing in that first half is maybe a little bit too slow at times, and they do kind of get lost in like making it as intense as it is, and that's kind of where it loses points for me in some areas. But at the same time, I think I do kind of have to recognize that that's just a subjectivity thing, and less of like I don't feel like he was ever being too over the top. I feel like you could watch this, and if this is your thing, you would be fine with it. I feel like it's more of a me issue than a film issue.
Yeah, and I mean, no, definitely, and I mean, having watched it like a few times now, I don't want to say that it changes, but kind of that slowness of like the first half, where you get that backstory of their relationship kind of and what they're doing, and then everything leading up to her death. It almost feels faster when you watch it a few more times.
Right.
Maybe because you know what's coming. Because really, I think it's like 45 minutes in until she dies. Like
I think it's almost exactly halfway. It's like pretty much a 2-hour movie, and then close to that point, like you said. Yeah.
Like, I actually discovered that today when I was watching it, because I had just gotten curious, and I just kind of checked to see what we were at when she was dying, and I was kind of amazed because I had just never noticed that before. And it's kind of a brilliant thing for them to do in order for it to essentially feel like there's two parts to the movie.
Right. And yeah, it's like we said, it's two very distinct parts, but it just both of them together make a whole, I think, very, very well. And it's definitely worth a watch.
I think both of our recommendations are definitely worth a watch. They're both vastly different from each other, but
in a weird way, kind of communicating similar.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, not similar points, but they're two parts. Like Mandy, it's two parts of a whole communicating a bigger, broader message that needs to be talked about.
Definitely.